My name is Steve Schultz, and today we're out here to do a little sound file and tutorial on my Quacker duck call. So I'd like to go over the history of the call. I grew up hunting ducks in the Columbia Basin and been blowing every kind of duck call ever put together or made over the years. And finally couldn't come to one that I really liked, so I decided to design my own. So over about the last 6-7 years, I've been working with this triple reed call, and I think I've come up with something that guys are really going to get into. There's been kind of a buzz on it. I had a few made this year and they sold out like hotcakes once people learned that I had a few of them. So what I've got left around my neck are what I've got to hunt with. So we're going to do a little sound file so you can hear what the call sounds like, and then I'm going to go over some of the mechanics of using the call. So in the video, we're going to talk about duck call mechanics, duck calling scenarios, duck call care, and if you have any interest in purchasing or talking about the duck call, there'll be contact information at the end of the video. Everything's based off of a quack in this call. That's why it's called the duck quacker, and the name of it is derived from my dad, who when I was young, he wasn't a caller, but he introduced me to hunting. But he would always ask me when we're out someplace, you got your duck quacker with you? So that's where the name comes from. So it's in honor of my father, who is now passed on. Anyway, we're gonna get into this duck call a little bit and the different tones and sounds you can get out of it. This is a ported call. In other words, I've got a port drilled into the insert. This is not a J frame, thus that is why the hole is so much bigger, the exhaust hole where the sound comes out. If I take this call apart, you're going to look at it. It's got the guts and the soundboard and the reeds are separate. It's not a J frame. Everything is based off of the quack. I put clean air into this call. We built the sound into the call. So I'm just trying to push clean air. So if I was going to teach you how to run this call, the first thing is you got to pressurize air and just push a stream of air through it and get the reeds vibrating in this manner right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that tone up with the aid of my tongue and with the aid of my hand. So here in the Columbia Basin, I designed this call. It's a big water call, but it also has the fundamentals of a finishing call if you're hunting smaller ponds and bodies of water. But primarily, I built it for hunting big water. We hunt the Columbia River, the Snake River, big bodies of water where we need to be heard. So it's a volume call. That's why the exhaust hole is bigger, and that's why it pushes a lot of volume and can be heard at great distances. Okay, the call presses together. It's got a double O-ring setup, and that's what seals it in the barrel. If you look on the side of the tone trough, you'll see that there are two lines. Those are the tuning lines. And the wedge sits somewhere in between that, depending on if you want the call lower or higher. I usually have it somewhere about in the middle. On a double reed, it's usually closer to the bottom line here. On the triple, it's usually in between, sometimes up towards the top line, but those are the guidelines for where you put the wedge and the pressure. Also, the downward pressure on this, I have to sand each one of these these wedges that go on top of these reeds and the triple, because this is a double reed frame. The downward pressure also is important. If you put that in there and it's loose, the reeds will be sloppy and the call's not going to operate the way it's supposed to. Also, if you look at the reeds, you're going to see that there's a slight taper in the triple. The doubles are stacked straight, one on top of the other. The triple has a staggered stack. In other words, the bottom reed is the longest reed. The middle reed, which is the heavier reed, the 15 thousandths, is a slightly bit shorter, and then the top reed is a slightly bit shorter than that. So there's a slight taper from the top to the bottom on the reeds. They're also dimpled, and the top two reeds will be dimpled. The bottom one will be slick. And the other thing, if you take these apart, and I suggest you don't once I tune them, because once I get them there, they're ready. But if you do, be careful with this setup here, and understand that these reeds also have a curvature to them. I take every one of these reeds and I put my finger on the top and stick it on a table and push down and see which way it wants to bend. You want the way it wants to bend up on all of these, because a duck call is all about lift on these reeds. And periodically I'm snapping these reeds and lifting them. I'm going to put it back together. Once you snap it and put it back together, they usually rasp up a little more. See, I've been running that call. I snapped it, now it's right back to where it was. As you run the call during the course of a morning, you're going to be putting moisture into it. So as you do, the sound's basically going to start to smoothen out and climb. So I always carry a lens cloth with me to wick the moisture out between these reeds during the course of a morning to get it back to where I started with. The hole drilled in the insert, a lot of people think that that's something that you take your finger and put on and off. It's not designed for that. This hole has a purpose. When I started with this call, I started drilling one size drill bit, then I'd run the call, and I kept increasing the size of the hole till I got to the tone that I wanted to come out of the call. As you can see, if you look right now, most of the time I blow this call with that port pointed towards my palm. And with my hand, I put this over the end of the call, and I'm back pressuring this duck call with my last three fingers. I have pretty good sized hands, but I'm forming a cavity. It's very rare that I run the call wide open with my hand straight open unless I'm really trying to hail high ducks. But now I'll show you the difference in the sounds. If you run this wide open with your hand open, now if I add my hand, I'm going to add a lot more duck to the call. People ask me, how do you get the fleshy sound of that hen mallard sound out of a duck call? Well, this is flesh, and that's why we incorporate that as a back pressuring device over the duck call. So consequently, we're going to push some air through this call to get everything working on it. Like the J-frames and the single reed and the lighter double reeds, they take less air. This call is going to require a more volume of air to get it to the top. And the beauty of it is, it's kind of like a hybrid double. In other words, it's got more backbone and it's got a little more volume, and you really can't push too much air into it and squeak it out. That was the beauty of the design. Adding that extra reed kind of stiffened things up so it wouldn't break over like a lot of double reeds do. Now I do make a double reed in this call too for guys that are double reed purists, but for me and in the hunting situation and what I do, this triple is unbeatable on big water, small water, you name it. But you cannot push enough air through this call. I mean, this thing will really get up. So as you see right there, I pushed as much air as I could through the call, and it still maintained integrity even at the top. And I tune my calls a little bit higher on the high end for me, like a young hen, because I think they can hear that farther than a low raspier hen. Now I can still get down on this call when I'm trying to finish them and be really ducky and soft. Hand, air control, tongue control. If you approach this like it's any reeded musical instrument, the only difference being is we're trying to make sounds to call a wild duck versus making music, but it is a reeded musical instrument. And if you approach it with that mindset and put that kind of effort into it, you will get out of it what it's intended to do, which is to sound like a duck and break ducks at high altitudes and finish ducks when you get them down and working. I talked about the port in the insert and how I usually point it towards my palm. You can also take that port if you want to get a little different tone out of this call. And what it usually does, it makes the call a little raspier and a little higher pitch, and point it to the air. I'm still going to back pressure it with my hand, but I'll illustrate the difference. Okay, that's quacking. Now, if I point it towards the air, towards the open side of my hand, it went up in pitch, an octave or two, and it changes the sound of the call, so I can actually get a couple of different calls, or ducks. That's with the hole pointed towards the open side of my hand. This is with the hole pointed towards my palm. So you get a little hollower hen and a little raspier and higher hen if you take that port and point it towards the open side. They're both real ducky, but it gives you two different sounds. And sometimes that comes into play. For hailing ducks, sometimes I have that pointed towards the open side of my hand because it gives me a little higher pitch and a little more uppity up when I'm trying to get up and get their attention. As you can see, my hand's really important because it really adds a lot of emphasis to each note. Most people, when they run a duck call, they just blow straight notes. That's with my hand open to the air and just using my tongue. By adding my hand, I get a two-layered, tiered note with each note in the call. So I'm getting an ack, 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 ack. So it's not just straight bap, 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 bap. It's ack, 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 ack. And that's the tongue action too. You can hear my tongue going in and out of the palate of my mouth. So it's ack, 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 ack. So I'm pushing air up with the aid of my diaphragm. I'm pressurizing air and I'm pushing it in a steady stream through the duck call. And I pretty much have an open throat because you're trying to push quite a volume of air through this call due to the exhaust hole. J-frames and most like duck commander calls and all of the J-frames have a small exit hole, but that's the back pressure built in. That's why I'm talking about using my hand, and the air control comes with my tongue. So what I do personally, I kind of anchor the tip of my tongue against my lower teeth. And if I was to draw a picture, this is the palate of my mouth, and this is my tongue. I'm actually anchoring my tongue and allowing my jaw to drop my tongue. So my tongue isn't moving independently of itself other than when I'm doing a feed call. I'm just manipulating the cavity, bigger, smaller, by dropping my jaw. So if you were to look at this from the side when I'm running a duck call, you can see the action. So the tip of my tongue's anchored right here against my lower teeth. Putting quacks, quack, quack, just putting quacks together. And then when I run it, my tongue rises and falls with the aid of my jaw. My personal hunting calls, actually, I prefer the look of wood, so I do make a limited number of wood barrels. I just like the look of cocoa and the sound of black wood. But most of the calls I offer are acrylic, unless you specify you would prefer a wood with an acrylic insert. The difference being, with the acrylic, things don't move. If you live in a really, really dry climate like we do here in the basin, then you can probably get away with the look of wood and the sound of wood. They differ slightly, but pretty much the tonal qualities are the same in the acrylic as they are in the wood. This is a lot more trouble-free. A duck call is an instrument, so I would suggest you treat it as such. I see a lot of guys, they get done with their calls, they just throw them in the bottom of their blind bag. They're wet, and especially a wood call. These don't tolerate moisture and sitting in a dark space. Every time I'm done hunting with these calls, I take them apart, I dry everything, and I let them sit out and air dry, both parts to the air, because I don't want moisture building up. The problem with wood is it absorbs moisture. So over time, and this isn't a banded call like a lot of them with a metal band. So I would suggest that you take great care of your instrument. You know, just don't throw them in the bottom of a blind bag. Even the acrylics, take them apart, let them dry out. They're a lot less trouble-free. And that's what most people buy, and that's what I suggest to most guys, especially if they live in wet climates where there's a lot of moisture. You're going to be way better off on acrylic because it doesn't move. The wood doesn't expand and contract according to humidity and the temperature and all of that. So the reason I use wood primarily is I just like the look of it. I can get the same tones out of an acrylic call. So right now I'll have a couple of options as far as the duck quacker goes. I'm going to offer an acrylic version of the calls, and I'll have several different colors. And the two woods I'll be using are black wood and cocobolo.